All right, Damien, it's about that time. Are you ready for me to kick us off?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Enterprise automation can take your IT department from the department of no to the department of go. Whether your market is citizens, students, or sales, your customers are looking for ways to go to market quicker than ever before. By unifying the silos of IT through automation and the collaboration of workflows, not only will you be in the fast lane, you'll be the fast lane. Our speaker today is Damien Eversman, Staff Solutions Architect at Red Hat. Please note that we will be conducting a Q&A after the presentation. Feel free to enter your questions into the chat at any time. With that, I'll pass it to Damien. Welcome.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I hope the Merit Conference is treating everybody well this week. We got one more day to go in the week, and then it's the weekend. So anyway, let's get started with this. First of all, a little bit of introduction. My name is Damien Eversman, and I do work for Red Hat. However, I've only been with Red Hat for about 5 years. Prior to that, I jumped around between public sector and private sector a little bit as a developer, development manager, systems engineer, enterprise architect. I spent some time in the data center as an operations person, and finally now I am a solutions architect. So I've kind of been in just about every possible role that you can do in IT, and so I've had a lot of experiences, and I feel like I've learned a lot over the years. Got a bunch of contact information there. If you want to reach out to me, feel free, hit me up on Twitter, drop me an email. I'm fine with just about any sort of contact. Just a little bit about who I really am. I normally like to give a little bit of personal information just so that you can get to know me. What you're looking at there is I'm in Chicago, so I'm just across the lake from you. And if you look right there in the middle there, that's the Sears Tower. We still call it the Sears Tower, those of us who are serious about it. The lighter colored building that is right next to it is actually the Franklin building, and that's the building where Red Hat's offices are. So when all of this pandemic stuff gets over, if this pandemic stuff gets over, that's where I will be headed. Couple other pictures there. You see some pictures of my family. They're very excited about me being a Red Hatter. My wife and kids really like to get involved with a lot of stuff. And then my dog, who thinks that she's another human member of the family. So I would reread this to you because I think it's kind of exciting and interesting, but we've already had a nice reading of that, so we'll go ahead and go along. Needless to say, I leaned in quite a bit on the automotive analogy here, so you can definitely expect me to be doing a few automotive puns. So let's talk about what we're really going to discuss today. We'll spend a few minutes talking about what automation is, because it's not always clear what automation is and what it's good for. We'll talk about where collaboration fits into this, because automation doesn't necessarily imply collaboration, but that's sort of the other piece of enterprise automation. So then we'll bring those two together and we'll talk about enterprise automation as a whole and what it means, what it can do for you, what it can do for your organization, and why it's important to think about enterprise automation as a whole, and just automation isn't enough. Then we'll do some pitfalls, some things that you can expect as you go on your journey from wherever you happen to be right now to enterprise automation. And then I'll end with a couple of wins in the real world. And when I say wins, obviously these are going to be experiences that my company Red Hat has had with different companies that are actually implementing enterprise automation in different ways. So why automate? Well, first, we need to define automation. Let's talk about what the definition is. And so I've got the Merriam-Webster definitions up here, and there's 3 different definitions. And as you read through them, they seem a little wonky, right? There's the technique of making an apparatus, a process, or a system operate automatically. Well, we've kind of included the word in the definition of the word. And in fact, the second one is the same, right? The state of being operated automatically. The third one includes it, and it kind of gets there, but still, I'm not very fond of definitions that include the word you're defining. So here's my definition. It's sort of a hybrid of the 3 and not using it. Automation is the technique of making some process operate with the need for minimal or no human intervention. That's actually pretty cool. I like that. But why would we automate? Well, there's a number of reasons that we'd automate. Obviously, there's the saving money reason, right? This is a study done by Forrester. It was commissioned by Red Hat, talking about the benefits of Ansible Tower, which is Red Hat's product for enterprise automation, across our customers that are using it. And across the board, you can see that there are reductions in recovery time. There's reductions in time to deploy workload. There's reductions in the amount of man hour needed to deliver products or services to customers. Payback happens pretty quickly, and there's a lot of return on investment when you implement automation. That's not to say that it's necessarily an instantaneous thing, right? It takes some time to really implement that automation, but once you get it running, you do see an ROI. And that ROI is across the board, whether it's time, man hours, money, or all three. In the case of automation, and of course, we're talking about IT here, you can actually automate a lot of things. This right here is a non-complete list of the things that our product, again, Ansible, can automate. Obviously, there are other products out there and there are other things that can be automated. But as you can see here, it's not just your typical processes like, for instance, an operator sitting down and running a shell script, right? You can do all sorts of things with automation, from automating a cloud provider like AWS or Azure, from automating virtualization like VMware or Red Hat virtualization, or a container solution like OpenShift or Kubernetes, right? You can automate Windows, you can automate Linux, you can automate Mac operating systems, you can automate provisioning of software. Believe it or not, network devices can be automated. Security devices like firewalls can be automated. Monitoring devices, operating systems, storage, the list goes on and on. So that's a lot of things that we can automate, and we talked about savings, but let's talk about some other reasons why you might want to automate. Big one, oh, sorry, jump past, there we go. A big one is that grabbing headlines is not a good thing. I don't know how many of you might remember a few years back, there was this huge outage kind of in the late winter, early spring, where AWS kind of fell off the map for about half a day and the entire internet broke, right? One person here, Daniel Barber, actually tweeted, "It's kind of terrifying how much of the internet is down because of the AWS outage right now." So everything came back and everybody recovered, and there were news headlines and all that stuff, but like most things, the news headlines passed and there wasn't a lot of follow-up. Well, you can better believe that Amazon followed up on what actually happened. This is just a snip from their root cause analysis. An authorized S3 team member executed a command which was intended to remove a small number of servers. Unfortunately, one of the inputs to the command was entered incorrectly, and a larger set of servers was removed than intended. What the rest of the report goes on to detail is how this created a sort of domino effect that spiraled out of control, and over the course of a few hours, brought down half of AWS. What's not included in my quote here, but is detailed in that report, is that that authorized S3 team member was actually performing routine analysis. He was doing something that he did regularly, often, day in and day out. And actually, the entire process happened because when he entered a number, he hit the keyboard twice. Instead of entering a 1, he hit an 11. And that caused half of the internet to drop off the planet. He was performing a routine process. This is where automation shines. Humans are terrible at doing routine things. When we do something the first time, we're meticulous, we're methodical, we make sure that we get it done exactly the way that we've been directed to get it done. When we do it the 5th time or the 10th time, it's old hat. We can do it with our eyes closed and one hand tied behind our back. And that's when humans end up making mistakes. And that's where automation doesn't make mistakes. So one of the best reasons to automate is to avoid mistakes like this. Ones that, though small, right, entering an 11 instead of a 1, can be entirely catastrophic and destroy not only your business or your contingency, but actually put a lot of people in the dark, risk a lot of people's lives, and in many cases can be the end of a company or the end of a government organization. So we've talked a little bit about what automation is now. Automation is kind of like automotion, first pun, right? You can get from point A to point B faster and in a more reliable fashion. Not always 100%, but better than someone who's doing it, right? This is the sort of commuter of processes. It's a repeatable process that is more dependable than what came before. Like, I'd much rather be driving a car than riding that horse and buggy. And it's a tool in a practitioner's toolbox. It's not necessarily something that replaces that practitioner, but it's a tool. So let's move on to talk about the collaboration connection, right? Where does collaboration fit in all this? Well, like before, let's talk about what collaboration is. Again, Merriam-Webster defines it in 3 definitions. It's to work jointly with others together, especially in an intellectual endeavor, to cooperate with or willingly assist an enemy of one's country, and especially an occupying force. Perhaps they actually had IT departments in mind here. Huh? To cooperate with an agency or instrumentality which is one which with which one is not immediately connected, right? So what's it mean? Well, it means working together, right? Um, let's talk about sort of why we collaborate, right? And I've sort of got a Yoda-esque statement here, right? Sharing leads to collaboration, collaboration leads to DevOps, and DevOps leads to enlightenment, right? The main tenets of DevOps are CALMS. So let's talk about what CALMS is. CALMS stands for culture, automation, lean IT, measurement, and sharing, right? Culture. Everything in DevOps is built on culture. DevOps is the culture of collaboration, right? Automation, that's what this whole presentation is talking about here, so I'm not going to dive into that, but really it's about removing the toil, the work, the monotony of someone's job. Lean IT is about smoothly transitioning from one person to the next, from one process to the next, from one work center to the next, right? Measurement is a really important part of DevOps here, right? Measurement is the way we know that we're succeeding. And then finally, sharing. Sharing is, again, kind of going back to that lean IT, right? The idea is that we're going to focus on breaking down silos, sharing knowledge, sharing best practices, making sure that everything that we do that makes something better, we share with the rest of the organization and we don't keep in our little silo, right? So getting back to my prerequisite automotive analogy, right? Culture is the camshaft of this engine, right? Without that, nothing happens. That's what keeps the whole organization turning, right? And then automation, lean IT, measurement, and sharing, those are the different pistons that are constantly driving that camshaft. You'll note that automation here is one of the most important pieces, right? We all know that a piston is an important part of an engine. And if you have one that's not working, if one of your cylinders isn't firing, that's when your car starts lurching and your engine starts knocking, and that's not a good thing, right? So we need all 4 of these cylinders firing. We need to make sure that that camshaft of culture keeps turning, right? So DevOps is the guardrail of IT, right? It holds some things together, right? Everybody moving in the same direction, and keeps some things apart, people moving in opposite directions, right? With DevOps, we define roles. We define what a developer is. We define what an operator is. And we make sure that those people know their jobs, right? And to be honest, we talk about DevSecOps a lot now, right? It's development, security, and operations. Really, DevOps is not about just developers and operations. It's about all of the stakeholders in a process, right? It's about defining what everybody's job is and letting everybody know where those handoffs are. And that enables us to actually define processes and automation and everything that can keep things moving smoothly between those processes and those pillars within the DevOps structure, right? And that's where we bring in the lean IT to remove those hiccups. And then everyone shares the best practices. So this is really kind of the whole point of DevOps, is to make sure that everyone knows what their job is, know which way they're supposed to be going, and make sure that they don't get in anybody's way. So collaboration here, or DevOps, is like the rules of the road. It's the infrastructure that we share. It's the laws that we abide by. It's that agreement that we're going to do what is right, right? When you get on the road, you trust that the other drivers around you, obviously, trust but verify. You trust that all of the drivers around you know the rules of the road, know the laws, know how to drive safely. They've taken the same minimal driver's education that you have, and they have the experience, right? Driving, like DevOps, is a culture, right? We, as a culture of drivers, trust that everyone else is participating in that culture the same way. And that's exactly what DevOps and collaboration are. So how does this come together in enterprise automation, right? Well, once again, we need a definition before we get started. What is an enterprise, right? So the definition of enterprise, it is a project or undertaking that is especially difficult, complicated, or risky. Sounds about right for everybody here who's involved in an enterprise. That seems to make sense. It is a unit of economic organization or activity, especially a business organization, right? And this applies to a government organization, an educational organization, a business organization. It is a systematic and purposeful activity. And enterprise is readiness to engage in daring or difficult action, initiative. It's like Merriam-Webster had us in mind here, right? We're going to go off on this daring journey. So let's talk about enterprise automation. This is the race car of automation, right? And whether you're a rally fan, an F1 fan, a stock car, NASCAR, whatever, my analogies are starting to get a little thin, but you get the point. Automation and collaboration to the extreme. This is where we bring everybody together and enable automation across those silos and make sure that everybody can get their job done most efficiently and hand things off as well as possible, right? We're achieving end-to-end benefits by automating everything from the beginning. So let's do a little example here, right? Here's an enterprise automation journey. Now, I know this slide is busy. I know there's a lot on here, but you're going to understand it in a minute. This is an application provisioning process. Now, yes, I'm oversimplifying here. There's actually more than 7 steps in provisioning an application. I'm not going to go through all of those. And yes, all of my times are kind of very round and very exact, but again, it's an example, right? So when I'm provisioning a new application into the data center, there's a number of steps that need to be taken. I need to have the virtual machine provisioned and the operating system placed on that virtual machine. It needs to be secured. I need to attach and provision storage. I need to configure the network for it. I need to actually deploy the application onto the server. That application then needs to be secured and reviewed for security. And then finally, I need to do something to launch that application to make it available to the people that it's directed at, to the stakeholders, right? Now, there are definitely more steps than that. And they're definitely more complicated. And in some cases, some of these might be combined, some of these might be split up. But in a data center or in an enterprise without automation, let's talk about the process to achieve that, right? I put in a ticket to my ticketing system, ServiceNow or whatever it is, and I say, I want a new copy of this application deployed into the data center. So that triggers a whole bunch of approvals, which takes a little bit of time. And then finally, once it gets all its approvals, it goes into this workflow that we're looking at on the screen here, right? And each one of these different steps is probably handled by a different person, if not a completely different silo, right? So the first person gets it, and maybe it sits in their work queue for a little while, but they get to it. Let's say it takes them an hour to manually provision a VM with an operating system. Maybe they've got a template or something, a little bit of automation. Then they hand it off to the next person and put it in the next person's work queue. And it maybe sits there for 8 hours. So they don't get to it till tomorrow. And that person goes through and does the hour-long process of going through their security checklist and securing the VM. And once that's done, then they hand it off to the next person, right? And that person is going to allocate or attach storage. And that might take an hour while they find the most efficient storage and provision it and configure the network and deploy the application and. Right? When this is all done, the process has taken over 50 hours to complete. That's over 1 week worth of work effort, right? And the interesting statistic here is it's probably taken 6.5, 7 hours worth of actual human effort, but then it's spent another 48 hours sitting in someone's queue around the data center, right? Waiting for someone to be available, waiting for someone to get to it. So let's talk about bringing automation in. Let's give every one of these people a tool to perform their task using automation, right? So what that means is now they're able to slim their task down to taking just 15 minutes, right? Because nothing happens instantaneously. All of these things require computers to go off and process different things to happen. So they've sped up each of their tasks to 15 minutes, some of them even 10 minutes or 5 minutes, right? So we've really sped up this process. But of course, because each person has their own automation tool, it's now still taking time to hand off from one person to the next, right? It comes into my queue, I trigger the automation to do my job, 15 minutes later, I pass it off to the next person. So what we've done now is we've taken the human processing time and brought it down to under an hour and a half. But that standby time is still there. This still takes over a week to get done. So what are we to do? That's where enterprise automation comes in. Enterprise automation not only enables you to get those repeated processes happening quickly, but it enables you to get them in quick succession, right? Think about what the assembly line did for cars, right? Let's say we're building a car body, right? Used to be they drop off the sheet metal on a loading dock, and someone would pick it up and cut it and stick it on someone else's stack. And then that another person would pick it up and bend it and stick it on someone else's stack. And the next person would pick it up and weld. You get the point. Same process. What this does and what the assembly lines did for the automotive industry is take out that standby time in between. In the case of my deploying my application, the handoffs are just 5 minutes as one process spins down and the next one spins up. I've taken that entire process of deploying that application from over a week to less than 2 hours. And to be honest, that's actually probably a high estimate. So let's talk about what that might look like in a product, right? Ansible Tower, again, is the product that Red Hat sells. And what it enables you to do is actually take all of these different automation tasks that people have written, right? The configurers, the deployers, the network people, the storage people, the applications people. It enables them to each write their own automation and then make that available to the rest of the enterprise to use, right? Someone can log in, and if they have the right permissions, they can do different automation tasks. They can deploy things with just by pushing a button in the UI. Everything's automated, logged, handled within this UI. So it really enables people across the organization to do different things. In addition to that, it enables them to create workflows, right? So I can have my virtualization engineer working with my application deployment engineer, and they don't both need to be sitting at their desks and ready to spin up at the same moment, right? They're able to actually do their honing of their process on their own time and then make that automation available to the process. So what is enterprise automation? Enterprise automation is like self-driving smart cars, right? But it's not just self-driving smart cars. It's more like a world where all of the cars are smart cars and they all work together, right? This is sort of the future that people like Elon Musk are looking at, right? The fact that once all of the cars are smart, they talk together and we don't have humans making those monotony mistakes, right? It's all of the fun, but just a little bit of the work, not nearly as much as it used to be. It keeps the eyes on the road and the hands on the wheel for you, but it makes sure that the right people are driving in the right direction at the right time. And this is where enterprise automation shines. So let's talk about some of the potholes that you might experience on the road to enterprise automation. There's a few of them here. I'm only going to cover a few. These are some of the bigger ones that people are used to seeing, but trust me, there's a lot, and there's people out there that can help. So a couple of them. Not everyone shares or even knows the vision. That's a big one. There's also a tendency to return to the silos and kingdom building of yore, right? There's the fear of automation, and then there's also the lack of support from above. So let's spend a few minutes on each one of those, right? In order for enterprise automation to work, it needs to be a shared vision. This gets back to that culture that we talked about that was the driving force behind everything, right? This is a culture change. This is something that people aren't used to. And when not everyone shares that vision, the culture and the vision get fractured. Once that happens, everything starts falling apart. That latency creeps in, that error creeps in. And if people can't trust it, then it doesn't work. They don't use it, right? So this is kind of like that whole Tesla autopilot. Everyone needs to be on the same page or else you're due for an abrupt stop at 87 miles an hour, right? Everyone wants to own their kingdom. That's a huge problem that a lot of organizations deal with. People are really used to sort of the siloed ways of doing things, right? Enterprise automation is about openness and sharing. You know, we talked about that when we talked about the culture of collaboration and DevOps, right? It's all about sharing and laying all your cards on the table, right? Kingdoms are built with walls and wars. But there's no place for towers and walls within enterprise automation, unless, of course, you're talking about Ansible Tower. The next one is the fear of automation, right? Everyone has that fear, right? That automation is going to come in and all of a sudden it's going to take over and they're going to be out of a job. And in the case of IT, that's not really the case, right? Enterprise automation doesn't replace people, it enables them, right? It enables them to be rock stars, right? If you are a VMware engineer, you're not going to be replaced by the automation, but it's going to make your job easier. It's going to take away all of that monotony, all of that drudgery, all of that toil, so that you can actually spend your time focusing on the more important things, like the bigger ideas. How can we actually streamline processes? How can we do things better? It gets rid of all of that monotonous stuff that keeps you busy every Monday morning when you read your email queue and enables you to actually pay attention to things that are important to you, important to the organization, and in many cases, important to the world. Finally, you know, there's this whole question of is enterprise automation a bottom-down initiative or bottom-up initiative or top-down initiative, right? And the answer is yes, right? For enterprise automation to be a success, it has to be accepted at all levels of the organization, whether it's the top or the bottom, right? An organization that tries to do this grassroots automating things is going to work well, but unless you have the support from the top, you're not going to get that true enterprise automation where things cut across all of the different silos. And vice versa, if it's a directive from the top, but it doesn't have the buy-in at the bottom, it's just not going to happen. And I think we've all seen things like that happen in the past where directors and managers and people at the high levels of an organization make a choice and make a decision without the buy-in of the people that are actually going to have to perform it. And we know those don't work really well. Last automotive analogy, I promise. Whether it's a simple flat tire, a cracked engine block, or a multi-car pileup, not implementing enterprise automation can be enough to keep you on the road. Now, here's the deal. There are a lot of different ways that you can do this out there, right? Enterprise automation is something that you can do yourself, right? But it's sort of the comparison between having a fully stocked garage at home with all of the tools I need to work on my car and get my car up and running and humming and tuned, or taking it to a garage where experts do it, right? Or anything in between, right? In this YouTube world, we can do mismatched things where we bring people in to help us with things. Enterprise automation is very much the same way. Enterprise automation is something that you can do from the beginning by yourself with the right tools and the right processes. And it's also something that you can get help, bring someone in and help you to get your organization going. So, talk for a few minutes here real quick about successes in the enterprise automation world, and then we'll move on to questions. So, one of Red Hat's customers is Microsoft. And believe it or not, this is actually a lot of collaboration that's been going on between Red Hat and Microsoft over the years. Microsoft uses Ansible automation to actually automate their entire network. And this is something that they've been doing for many years. And they're very proud of the fact that a lot of the networking processes that are built into Azure and actually built into their enterprise network as a whole are automated. SureScripts is actually a company you probably work with, and they use Red Hat Ansible automation to streamline a lot of the management of their infrastructure. You know, this is going back to that example we talked about, spinning up new machines to host applications and managing those machines, right? Enterprise automation helps SureScripts actually streamline that process to make sure that they're getting the right resources in the right place in order to serve their customers, us. Energy Market Company is it's a energy market out in the Asia Pacific region, and they actually use enterprise automation to help keep things running 24/7. Right, the fact that they can actually have processes automated that allow the remediation of certain issues without the intervention of anybody is something that's really helpful for them. And they also use it for simple things like their different users that come in and say need things like permissions increases or password changes, right? They have a ticketing system that actually takes those different tickets, and once they've received the right approvals, they actually automatically process those things through automation. And the banking industry uses it too, believe it or not. The banking industry needs high availability, right? As all of these different millions of transactions are floating out across the wire, all hours of the day, every day of the week, 365 days a year, they need to make sure that they are highly available and reliable. And these geographically separated data centers that they have need to be in line with each other. And so enterprise automation can be used not only to keep those things up and running, but actually to remediate configuration drift, right? As something changes on a particular system, as something gets a little out of whack, enterprise automation can actually enable you to not only catch that, but to fix that before it becomes a problem. So before we get to the questions, I did want to point out Ansible Fest. That's something that Red Hat does every year. And I know it says October 13th and 14th on there, but like the Merit Conference, Ansible Fest was virtual this year. And if you go to ansiblefest.com, you can still register for the conference, and all of the content that was presented at the Ansible Fest conference this year is available for download and streaming so that you can actually go and consume that content for the next year, I believe. So that's another place that you can go to find out more about enterprise automation in general or specific automation tools or integrations that exist. So that's actually the end of my presentation. And so I think we're going to hear a few questions that we've got queued up. Is that right?
For sure. Thank you so much, Damien. That was very insightful and good information. So yeah, I have a few questions here. If I'm not the decision maker, but we clearly have identified the need for deploying this automation, what's the best method to prepare and sell this new culture of automation to a potential stakeholder?
So that's a really good question, and there's a number of ways that you can go about it. It really depends sort of on where you are within the organization, right? So obviously, grassroots campaigns are always the best kind of campaigns. And there are automation tools, like for instance, Ansible. It doesn't require you to have an enterprise level solution in place in order to benefit from the automation. So if you remember the 3 slides that talked about the time savings, right? The first slide was each person implementing their own automation.
Right.
And that's the first step. And that's something that you can do today. You can go out and download Ansible or any other automation tool and actually automate what you do day to day. And that's a great way to then take and demonstrate the savings that you and other people in your organization have achieved to the higher levels and talk about, hey, look, we're already saving X number of hours, X number of dollars, X number of resources. Let's take it to the next step. Companies like Red Hat also have different demonstrations that we can do. We also do workshops. And then we have these things called automation journeys. And what an automation journey is where we actually come in and we ask questions of your organization and find out where you are and where you want to be. And then it's as simple as our consultants tell you, these are the steps that you can take. You can either take this information that we've given you and roll with it, or we can come in and help you take those steps. So there's a lot of different choices that you can make on that journey.
Okay, yeah, those are good. Like, take your silo and basically proven point to sell. So furthermore on to that question, what is your experience with gaining sustained buy-in from the bottom up to maintain steam once you've started these discussions? And then you also hear like, well, what happens with my job?
Well, so my experiences with bottom up is actually, that's the way this trip normally goes, right? We're in IT. we're all geeks, right? I mean, that's what we do. We like to tinker, we like to play around with things. And so most people have already started automating a process, right? If I do something more than once, I'm probably going to find a way to make it easier,
Sure.
right? So it's easy to get that buy-in at the ground level, right? And that's the way most of these things go. It's amazing to me when I go into an organization and I say, let's talk about Ansible. And there's almost always someone in the room that says, oh yeah, I'm already using that. I use that on my machine whenever I have to provision a new, I love it, right? Well, the conversation has just started there, right? Now we've got other people in the room. So the best way is really automate yourself and then tell everybody about it. And that's the way to go. And then your next question is, what about me? What about my job? What's that mean? And that kind of goes back to that fear of automation, right? What automation does is actually it enables you as a practitioner to become more of an expert at what you do. Instead of provisioning a new machine every Monday, you are now the curator of that automation to provision that machine. And every single time you revisit that automation, you can tweak it, you can speed it up. Instead of having to spend your time performing it every single time, you can now go in and tweak it and find new ways to streamline it. Or if you're no longer focusing and spending 30 of your 40 hours a week doing monotonous tasks, you can actually start looking at the bigger picture and not focusing on those menial, repetitive toil tasks that none of us like to do.
Fantastic. So you become the architect of your own time in a sense.
Exactly.
What would you think the main reason for going with Tower over AWX would be?
Well, in many cases, there's no question, right? It has to be done because a lot of organizations require there to be support. And the reason they require there to be support is because nobody wants to say the buck stops here, right? Everybody wants to be able to point a finger off at somebody else and say, no, actually, it's his fault. He's the reason that it failed. And in the case of something like Ansible, you can point the finger at Red Hat if something goes wrong. Or if you're not quite the expert you thought you were, well, we've got those experts, right? We can help you. And the nice thing about Red Hat is our support isn't break fix, right? Our support is ask us a question, we'll get you an answer, right? We really like to foster those experts. We are the experts, but we like to enable everyone else to be the experts too. So really that's the main reason that anybody uses anything that Red Hat does, right? Is not because it's the greatest product, because it's clearly built on open source. Yes, we spend a lot of time engineering, but we give that back up to the community. So the really important part is that support that you get, that person that you can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I need a little help.
I like that. I like how you highlighted the relationship as opposed to a response type support system, right?
Oh, I get that all the time from people. I get a phone call from one of my customers that says, hey, I'm a little confused about this. Do you know the answer to this? And they call me because I'm the sales guy that they've met. I'm the one that's been in their office. And even though I work for Red Hat, I'm not an expert in everything Red Hat. I hate to break that illusion, but support is. We have those experts on the phone, online, in chats, on a daily basis, and they're waiting to hear your questions.
Fantastic. So changing gears a bit, does implementing enterprise automation open your company up to particular known security risks? And furthermore, are there additional security risks born of automation that you can see possibly becoming an issue in the future?
So I'll be completely honest. Any change is an opening to risk, right? Not necessarily because there are risks inherent with the new technology that's coming in. There are risks inherent with the change that you're making, with people improperly implementing it the first time around, with people not being familiar with it, right? And that's the case for just about any new technology you're going to bring in. But the answer there is that there's also inherently security risks with not changing, right?
Which you
Um,
stated earlier. Yeah.
Right. Like if you don't change, if you're left in that old era of whatever, whether it's processes taking forever, or you're still running on, an ancient Linux kernel or an ancient Windows version, or you're still running, last year's version of whatever your application is, there are inherent risks without making those changes too. That's kind of the whole point of the enterprise being risky and scary, right? Is
Yeah.
we're taking on a little bit of weight, a little bit of difficulty here because we're taking on a lot of risk. And it's really all about where we place that risk and how we remediate that risk. The better choice almost all of the time is moving forward, not staying in the past. And so automation is going to help you move forward quicker. It's going to help you have the time to focus on moving forward and focus on those things. Obviously, if the automation is implemented improperly, right? If I write my automation task, whatever it is, and leave out a security step, then that's going to be a problem. But it's a problem if I leave out that step if I'm doing it manually too.
Okay, so as far as like the merit community, Damien, in your experience, are there unique challenges to implementing automation in IT from different institutional pillars like the commercial market, the higher ed market, government for sure?
I would say the higher ed market is almost always the most willing to try something new, right? And that's in their nature, right? Their nature is open source and higher ed work well together in general, right? Because higher ed was really like the OG open source, right? Like, hey, they wrote everything to begin with, and that's the way it was. I mean, Unix came from higher ed, and they're the most willing to take the most risks. Conversely, what's that?
Let's see what we can break today.
Exactly. Let's take it apart and put it back together again, right? Conversely, government is on the flip side of that coin, right? They feel saddled with the most risk because they are government institutions saddled with the good of the citizenry in mind, right? As opposed to a business who's making a calculated risk based on stockholders' willingness to take that risk. So, you sort of have that three tiers, and it's really weird because I'm in the public sector, and the public sector is education and government. So I sit on both extremes, while my commercial counterparts kind of sit in the middle. The interesting thing is, though, that when it comes to something like enterprise automation, government is normally the most eager to get in there because they're normally the most cash starved, right? And so they're looking for, how do I streamline this? How do I make this cheaper? How do I make this process that takes Joe his entire week only take a day so that Joe's backlog gets smaller?
Well, I wonder in reference to that with the COVID reality of 2020, that do you foresee education moving more towards that cash strapped, we need this as a must?
Absolutely. One of the biggest things that we're seeing in education right now is the problem that they are cash strapped, right? Whether it's because, there was no athletic season, right? And the income that came from, the football game sponsorships and all of the merchandising there, or we don't have the income from all of the students that live on campus, right? There's income that's generated by students living in the dorms and eating in the cafeterias, and they don't have that income either. Right. So really of the big three cash generators, right? Believe it or not, tuition is not one of them. Of the big three cash generators, the only one that's left is research.
Yeah.
Right. And research is grants from the government and grants from private institutions to figure stuff out like COVID. And automation really fits in well with research because research is all about gathering data, processing that data, and then figuring something out from the processed data. Well, processing data is monotonous, especially in the volumes that research deal with data, right? They come in with petabytes of data on a regular basis and need to crunch through that. And as we can automate those processes, as we can make that gathering and processing happen on its own and faster, that means that we can actually fulfill our grant faster and get another one. And at the same time, benefit the world because we've cured whatever disease we're curing.
Well, thanks for drawing that like all together there, because really with higher ed, the grant money, big money in COVID, you see these researchers trying to hammer these out as quickly as possible, and it
Absolutely.
can't happen fast enough. So I thank you for answering their questions and your fantastic presentation today.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Damien. Take care, everybody.